here. Globo's told me exactly where you are. Now come out of that sewage pipe this instant.
Uncle.
I have read your latest report.
Have you?
Yes. You took a great many pages to tell a very simple story. The long and short of it is that you have let a man slip through your fingers.
Well, not entirely.
Oh, no, dear nephew. You won't downplay your condition. The situation is very grave, and I see no reason why I should try to shield you from the consequences of your inefficiency. A repentance and renewal of what the other side call grace, on the scale of which you described, is a defeat of the first order. It amounts to a second conversion, and probably on a deeper level than the first.
I don't know what happened, Uncle. It was going so well. My patient was walking along by the old mill, in an ideal frame of mind, I thought. And I was coming in for a grand attack when suddenly there was an asphyxiating cloud, blinding and choking me.
Had you not been such a fool, you would have recognized that the asphyxiating cloud is a well-known phenomenon. It is the enemy's most barbarous weapon and generally appears when he is directly present to the patient under certain modes not yet fully classified. Some humans are permanently surrounded by it and therefore inaccessible to us.
Right. Thank you for explaining, Uncle. I'll be going now.
No. We are not yet finished. Let us speak of your blunders.
Must we?
We must, or you will never learn. First, by your own admission, you allowed the patient to read a book he really enjoyed because he enjoyed it, and not in order to make clever remarks about it to his new friends.
Yes, Uncle.
In the second place, you allowed him to walk down to the old mill and have tea there, a walk through the country he really likes, and by himself. In other words, you allowed him two real positive pleasures. Were you so ignorant as to not see the danger of this?
Well,
the characteristic of pains and pleasures is that they are unmistakably real, and therefore, as far as they go, give the man who feels them a touchstone of reality. Thus, if you had been trying to damn your man by the romantic method, by submerging him in self-pity for imaginary distresses, you would try to protect him at all costs from any real pain, because, of course, 5 minutes genuine toothache would reveal the romantic sorrows for the nonsense they were and unmask your whole stratagem. But you were trying to damn your patient by the world, that is, by palming off vanity, bustle, irony, and expensive tedium as pleasures. How can you have failed to see that a real pleasure was the last thing you ought to have let him experience? Didn't you foresee that it would kill, by contrast, all the trumpery which you have been so laboriously teaching him to value, and that the sort of pleasure which the book and the walk gave him was the most dangerous of all? That it would peel off from his sensibility the kind of crust that you have been forming on it and make him feel that he was coming home, recovering himself?
Well,
as a preliminary to detaching him from the enemy, you wanted to detach him from himself and had made some progress in doing so. Now, all that is undone. But what? Speak up, imbecile.
By detaching the patient from himself, aren't we doing what the enemy wants us to do?
The enemy wants to detach men from themselves, but in a different way from our purposes. Remember always that he really likes the little vermin and sets an absurd value on the distinctness of every one of them. When he talks of losing themselves, he only means abandoning the clamor of self-will. Once they have done that, he really gives them back all their own personality and boasts, I'm afraid sincerely, that when they are wholly his, that they will be more themselves than ever. Hence, while he is delighted to see them sacrificing even their innocent wills to his, he hates to see them drifting away from their own nature for any other reason. And we should always encourage them to do so. The deepest likings and impulses of any man are the raw materials, the starting point with which the enemy has furnished him. To get him away from those is therefore always a point gained. Even in things indifferent, it is always desirable to substitute the standards of the world, or convention, or fashion for a human's own real likings and dislikings. I myself would carry this very far. I would make it a rule to eradicate from my patient any strong personal taste, which is not actually a sin, even if it is something quite trivial, such as a fondness for county cricket, or collecting stamps, or drinking cocoa. Such things, I grant you, have nothing of virtue in them, but there is a sort of innocence and humility and self-forgetfulness about them which I distrust. The man who truly and disinterestedly enjoys any one thing in the world for its own sake, and without caring tuppence for what other people say about it, is, by that very fact, forearmed against some of our subtlest modes of attack. You should always try to make the patient abandon the people or food or books he really likes in favor of the best people, the right food, the important books. I have known a human defended from strong temptations to social ambition by a still stronger taste for tripe and onions.
Yes, I understand now, Uncle.
It remains to consider how we can retrieve this disaster. The great thing is to prevent his doing anything. As long as he does not convert it into action, it does not matter how much he thinks about this new repentance. Let the little brute wallow in it. Let him, if he has any bent that way, write a book about it. That is often an excellent way of sterilizing the seeds which the enemy plants in a human soul. Let him do anything but act. No amount of piety in his imagination and affections will harm us if we can keep it out of his will. The more he feels without acting, the less he will ever be able to act. And in the long run, the less he will be able to feel. Yes. You'd better fix this, Wormwood, or you know what will happen to you.
Yes, Uncle. I was a fool.
So you are. Now, this. Don't move, just Try this.
My Lord Undersecretary.
What is it, Toadpipe? Can't you see that I'm busy?
It's your nephew, sir. He needs to see you.
What now?
Well, he wouldn't say, sir. He's waiting in your office.
All right. Hold this. Right here.
Yes, sir.
What do you want, Wormwood? I'm busy.
Uncle, having learned my lesson, I've decided to come to you for advice, rather than attempt this effort on my own.
I hope that doesn't mean that you'll be pestering me at every turn.
I'll try not to.
Well, what is it then?
My patient.
What about him?
He's not exhibiting any of the behaviors that marked his original conversion.
Oh, you mean he's not making any of those confident resolutions the recently repentant tend to make?
No.
No more lavish promises of perpetual virtue?
No, sir.
Not even the expectation of an endowment of grace for life?
No, Uncle. He seems to hope only for the daily and hourly pittance to meet his daily and hourly temptations.
Well, this is very bad. Right. I see only one thing to do at the moment. Your patient has become humble. Have you drawn his attention to the fact?
Uncle?
All virtues are less formidable to us once the man is aware he has them, but this is especially true of humility. Catch him at the moment when he really is poor in spirit and smuggle into his mind the gratifying reflection, by Jove, I'm being humble. And almost immediately, pride at his own humility, will appear. If he awakes to the danger and tries to smother this new form of pride, make him proud of his attempt, and so on, through as many stages as you please. But don't try this too long, for fear you awake his sense of humor and proportion, in which case he will merely laugh at you and go to bed.
Yes, Uncle.
But there are other profitable ways of fixing his attention on the virtue of humility. By this virtue, as by all the others, our enemy wants to turn the man's attention away from self to him and to the man's neighbors. All the abjection and self-hatred are designed in the long run solely for this end. Unless they attain this end, they do us little harm, and they may even do us good if they keep the man concerned with himself, and above all, if self-contempt can be made the starting point for contempt of other selves, and thus for gloom, cynicism, and cruelty. Are you getting this?
Yes, sir.
You must therefore conceal from the patient the true end of humility. Let him think of it not as self-forgetfulness, but as a certain kind of low opinion of his own talents and character. Some talents, I gather, he really has. Fix in his mind the idea that humility consists in trying to believe those talents to be less valuable than he knows them to be. No doubt they are, in fact, less valuable than he believes, but that is not the point. The great thing is to make him value an opinion for some quality other than truth, thus introducing an element of dishonesty and make-believe into the heart of what otherwise threatens to become a virtue. By this method, thousands of humans have been brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe that they are ugly and clever men trying to believe that they are fools.
Brilliant, Uncle.
However, to anticipate the enemy's strategy, we must consider his aims.
What aims might those be?
The enemy wants to bring the man to a state of mind in which he could design the best cathedral in the world and know it to be the best, and rejoice in the fact without being any more or less or otherwise glad at having done it than he would if it had been done by another. The enemy wants him, in the end, to be so free from any bias in his own favor that he can rejoice in his own talents as frankly and gratefully as in his neighbor's talents, or in a sunrise, or an elephant, or a waterfall.
Sunrise, elephant, waterfall?
Those are examples, you fool. He wants each man in the long run to be able to recognize all creatures, even himself, as glorious and excellent things. He wants to kill their animal self-love as soon as possible. But it is his long-term policy, I fear, to restore them to a new kind of self-love, a charity and gratitude for all selves, including their own. When they have really learned to love their neighbors as themselves, they will be allowed to love themselves as their neighbors. For we must never forget what is the most repellent and inexplicable trait in our enemy. He really loves the hairless bipeds he has created and always gives back to them with his right hand what he has taken away with his left.
Truly, Uncle, he loves them.
Yes. Can't you see it? It's the one reason why the enemy's whole effort is to get the man's mind off the subject of his own value altogether. He would rather the man thought himself a great architect or a great poet and then forgot about it than he should spend much time and pains trying to think himself a bad one. Your efforts to instill either vainglory or false modesty into the patient will therefore be met from the enemy's side with the obvious reminder that a man is not usually called upon to have an opinion of his own talents at all, since he can very well go on improving them to the best of his ability without deciding on his own precise niche in the Temple of Fame.
So, if I understand you correctly, I must exclude that reminder from my patient's consciousness.
At all costs.
At all costs.
The enemy will also try to render real in the patient's mind a doctrine which they all profess but find it difficult to bring home to their feelings. The doctrine that they did not create themselves, that their talents were given to them, and that they might as well be proud of the color of their eyes. But always, and by all methods, the enemy's aim will be to get the patient's mind off such questions, and yours will be to fix it on them. Even of his sins, the enemy does not want him to think too much. Once they are repented, the sooner the man turns his attention outwards, the better the enemy is pleased.
Yes, Uncle. Thank you.
You really have worked out this little performance of contrition, haven't you?
Uncle?
Standing there, taking my advice as if you don't hate and loathe me all the while.
Uncle, how can you say such a thing?
Because it is accurate, is it not? Your entire attitude at this moment is a sham.
Well, yes.
Good. You had me worried for a moment there. True contrition is an act of the enemy's beings, not one of ours. Now get out.
Yes, Uncle.
It's a lovely day, isn't it?
It is.
Do you see what's happening? My situation is near impossible. It's all happiness and contentment.
Yeah, it is due in part to the lull in their European war.
Mum, I think I'll take a stroll around the lake.
All right, John. I'll stay here. Quack, 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 quack. Oh, look at that.
I'll be back in a little while.
Where is Glubbo? She shouldn't leave the mother alone to enjoy herself.
She's hiding behind the moss on that oak tree.
Let's follow your patient around the lake. An opportunity may come to spoil his walk. Meanwhile, we will consider our overall strategy. Oh, I do detest these days of rest and relaxation.
Though if it fattens them up for us.
Oh, well, yes, there is that. But I am not surprised that there is a corresponding lull in this war of theirs and your patient's anxieties. Do we want to encourage this or to keep him worried?
Encourage it. No, keep him worried.
I don't know.
Tortured fear and stupid confidence are both desirable states of mind. Our choice between them raises important questions.
What kinds of questions?
Well, the humans live in time, but our enemy destines them to eternity. He, therefore, I believe, wants them to attend chiefly to two things: to eternity itself, and to that point in time which they call the present. For the present is the point at which time touches eternity. Of the present moment, and of it only, humans have an experience analogous to the experience which our enemy has of reality as a whole. In it alone, freedom and actuality are offered to them. He would therefore have them continually concerned either with eternity, which means being concerned with him, or with the present, either meditating on their eternal union with or separation from himself, or else obeying the present voice of conscience, bearing the present cross, receiving the present grace, giving thanks for the present pleasure.
Must you be so descriptive?
You must understand and deeply despise the disgusting nature of his activities. So our business is to get them away from the eternal and from the present. With this in view, we sometimes tempt a human, say a widow or a scholar, to live in the past. But this is of limited value, for they have some real knowledge of the past, and it has a determinate nature, and to that extent resembles eternity. It is far better to make them live in the future.
Why the future?
Principally because biological necessity makes all their passions point in that direction already, so that thought about the future inflames hope and fear, and also it is unknown to them, so in making them think about it, we make them think of unrealities. In a word, the future is, of all things, the thing least like eternity. It is the most completely temporal part of time, for the past is frozen and no longer flows, and the present is all lit up with eternal rays. Hence the encouragement we have given to all of those schemes of thought, such as creative evolution, scientific humanism, or communism. It fixes men's affections on the future, on the very core of the temporary. That's why nearly all vices are rooted in the future. Gratitude looks to the past, and love to the present. Fear, avarice, lust, and ambition look ahead.
But surely the enemy wants men to think of the future too.
Just so much as is necessary now for planning the acts of justice or charity, which will probably be their duty tomorrow.
What does that leave us, then?
We want a man hag-ridden by the future, haunted by visions of an imminent heaven or hell upon earth, ready to break the enemy's commands in the present, if by so doing we can make him think he can attain the one or avert the other. This places his whole attention on the success or failure of schemes whose end he will not live to see.
How clever.
We want a whole race perpetually in pursuit of the rainbow's end, never honest, nor kind, nor happy now, but always using every real gift which is offered to them in the present as mere fuel to heap on the altar of their future.
So, if I understand you correctly, it follows that, all things being equal, it's better for my patient to be filled with anxiety or hope about what might happen with this war than for him to be living in the present.
But the phrase living in the present is ambiguous. It may describe a process which is really just as much concerned with the future as anxiety itself. Your man may be untroubled about the future not because he is concerned with the present, but because he has persuaded himself that the future is going to be agreeable. As long as that is the real source of his tranquility will do us good, because it is only piling up more disappointment and therefore more impatience for him when his false hopes are dashed. If, on the other hand, he is aware that horrors may be in store for him, and is praying for the virtues wherewith to meet them, and meanwhile concerning himself with the present, because there and there alone all duty, all grace, all knowledge, and all pleasure dwell, his state is undesirable, and should be attacked at once.
Right.
But to watch him now, it is most likely that he is living in the present because his health is good and he is enjoying his work. I should break it up if I were you. Why should the creature be happy?
My sentiments exactly. Shall I have one of those ducks do something to him?
Don't be such an amateur, Wormwood. My dear Wormwood, you mentioned casually in your last letter that the patient has continued to attend one church, and one only since he was converted, and that he is not wholly pleased with it. May I ask what you are about? Why have I no report on the causes of his fidelity to the parish church? Do you realize that unless it is due to indifference, it is a very bad thing? Surely you know that if a man can't be cured of church-going, the next best thing is to send him all over the neighborhood looking for the church that suits him until he becomes a taster or connoisseur of churches. The reasons are obvious. In the first place, the parochial organization should always be attacked, being a unity of place and not of likings. It brings people together of different classes and psychology together in the kind of unity the enemy desires. The congregational principle, on the other hand, makes each church into a kind of club. And finally, if all goes well, into a clique or faction. In the second place, the search for a suitable church makes the man a critic, where the enemy wants him to be a pupil. What he wants of the layman in church is an attitude which may indeed be critical in the sense of rejecting what is false or unhelpful, but which is wholly uncritical in the sense that it does not appraise, does not waste time in thinking about what it rejects, but lays itself open in uncommenting, humble receptivity to any nourishment that is available. You see how groveling, how unspiritual, how irredeemably vulgar the enemy is. This attitude, especially during sermons, creates the condition, most hostile to our whole policy, in which platitudes become really audible to a human soul. There is hardly any sermon or any book which may not be dangerous to us if it is received in this attitude. So, bestir yourself and send this fool on a tour of the neighboring churches as soon as possible. Your record up to date has not given us much satisfaction. I have looked up in our records the two Anglican churches nearest him. Both have certain claims. At the first of these, the vicar is a man who has been so long engaged in watering down the faith to make it easier for what he supposes is an incredulous and hard-headed congregation, that it is now he who shocks his parishioners with his unbelief, not vice versa. He has undermined many a soul's Christianity. But perhaps your patient is not quite silly enough for this church, or not yet. At the other church, we have Father Spike. The humans are often puzzled to understand the range of his opinions. Why, he is one day almost a communist, and the next not far from being some kind of theocratic fascist. One day a scholastic, the next prepared to deny human reason altogether. One day immersed in politics, and the day after declaring that all states of this world are equally under judgment. We, of course, see the connecting link, which is hatred. The man cannot bring himself to preach anything which is not calculated to shock, grieve, puzzle, or humiliate his parents and their friends. But I must warn you that he has one fatal defect. He really believes, and this may yet mar all. But there is one good point which both of these churches have in common. They are churches dedicated to a factional thinking. I think I warned you before that if your patient can't be kept out of the church, he ought at least to be violently attached to some party within it. I don't mean on really doctrinal issues. About those, the more lukewarm he is, the better. No, the real fun is working up hatred over styles and approaches to worship. Stand or sit or kneel, lower the head, raise one's arms, traditional or modern music. These issues are an admirable ground for our activities. Without them, the church might have become a positive hotbed of charity and humility. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
You sent for me, Uncle.
Yes, I did, Wormwood. Do come in.
Oh. Well, what is this?
I've arranged to give you a demonstration.
Oh.
Yes, the rather contemptuous way in which you spoke of gluttony as a means of catching souls in your last report showed me, yet again, how ignorant you are.
How so?
One of the great achievements of the last 100 years has been to deaden the human conscience on the subject of gluttony, so that by now you will hardly find a sermon preached or a conscience troubled about it in the whole length and breadth of Europe. This has largely been effected by concentrating all our efforts on gluttony of delicacy, not gluttony of excess. By way of example, I invite you to turn your attention to this record of your patient's mother on the screen.
Good afternoon, madam. Table for two, is it?
No, just
So-
for one.
So these images came from Globos?
Indeed, at my request. Your patient's mother is a good example of using gluttony for our purposes.
I want the one
She
over there.
would be astonished, one day I hope will be, to learn that her whole life is enslaved to this kind of sensuality, which is quite concealed from her by the fact that the quantities involved are small. But what do quantities matter, provided we can use our human belly and palate to produce querulousness, impatience, uncharitableness, and self-concern?
That'll do.
Globos has this old woman well in hand.
Well, you surprise me.
Indeed. You are in sorry shape when I have to use Globos as a good example by which to teach you.
I'm willing to learn.
Then see for yourself. Your patient's mother is a positive terror to hostesses and servants. Here it is. Notice on the screen, the woman at an otherwise civil little tea party.
Would madam like the afternoon special?
Oh, please, all I want is a cup of tea. Weak, but not too weak. And the teeniest, weeniest bit of really crisp toast.
Yes, madam.
You see? Because all she wants is smaller and less costly than what has been set before her, she never recognizes as gluttony her determination to get what she wants, however troublesome it may be to others. At the very moment of indulging her appetite, she believes she's practicing temperance. Here she is, exhibiting the same behavior in a crowded restaurant.
Here we are.
Oh, that's far, far too much. Take it away and bring me about a quarter of it.
Yes, madam.
If challenged, she would say she was doing this to avoid waste. In reality, she does it because the particular shade of delicacy to which we have enslaved her is offended by the sight of more food than she happens to want.
Impressive.
The real value of the quiet, unobtrusive work which Globos has been doing for years on this old woman can be gauged by the way in which her belly now dominates her whole life. The woman is in what may be called the all-I-want state of mind.
All I want is a cup of tea properly made, or an egg properly boiled, or a slice of bread properly toasted.
But she never finds any servant or any friend who can do these simple things properly, because her properly conceals an insatiable demand for the exact and almost impossible palatal pleasures which she imagines she remembers from the past. A past described by her as
Oh, those were the days when you could get good service from the help.
But, of course, they are known to us as the days when her senses were more easily pleased and she had pleasures of other kinds which made her less dependent on those of the table. Meanwhile, the daily disappointment produces daily ill temper. Cooks give notice, and friendships are cooled. If ever the enemy introduces into her mind a faint suspicion that she's too interested in food, Glubose counters it by suggesting to her that she doesn't mind what she eats herself, but does like to have things nice for her boy. In fact, of course, her greed has been one of the chief sources of his domestic discomfort for many years.
Yes, I know.
Now, your patient is his mother's son. While working your hardest, quite rightly, on other fronts, you must not neglect a little quiet infiltration in respect of gluttony. Being a male, he is not so likely to be caught by the all-I-want camouflage. Males are best turned into gluttons with the help of their vanity, to think they know all about food, and not only food, but the best food. Watch your patient.
Well, it's true. It's the only restaurant in town where the steaks are properly cooked.
What begins as vanity can then be gradually turned into habit. But, however you approach it, the great thing is to bring him into the state in which the denial of any one indulgence, it matters not which, champagne or tea, or Sol Colbert or cigarettes, annoys him, for then his charity, justice, and obedience are all at your mercy.
I never would have thought.
That much is obvious to me. Mere excess in food is much less valuable than delicacy. Its chief use is a kind of artillery preparation for attacks on chastity. On that, as on every other subject, keep your man in a condition of false spirituality. Never let him notice the physical aspect. Keep him wondering which vice has delivered him into your hands, when a simple inquiry into what he has been eating or drinking for the last 24 hours would show him the truth. If he must think of the physical side of chastity, feed him the grand lie which we have made the humans believe, that physical exercise in excess and consequent fatigue are especially favorable to this virtue. How they can believe this in the face of the notorious lustfulness of sailors and soldiers may well be asked.
Speaking of chastity, Uncle, I've been wanting to ask you about techniques regarding sexual temptation. Or would you have me speak with Glubose about it, since she seems to be your current favorite?
Don't be snide with me, nephew.
Then what would you advise?
It's such a tedious discussion. Surely, even under Slubgob, you must have learned the most routine techniques.
I did, but...
But your training is still lacking, I am sure. All right. For that discussion, let us relocate.